Maomao grabbed a stick and sketched an orchid. It was the Lan of Lulan. Lihua ranked next in terms of powerful parents. This was only because they were the emperor's maternal relatives. The family had never risen all that far in the world. Maomao followed the orchid with a fruit. Lihua meant pear blossom. Actually, it was Lishu's family that had been rising in status over the past few generations. They were very ambitious and had offered their young daughter to the previous emperor as a wife. The shu of Lishu meant tree, so that is what Maomao drew next in her row of symbols. Jayukai's family was based at a trade junction in the west. They appeared to make a good deal of money from commerce. However, they were close to the border and paid much of what they made in taxes to sustain the national defense. The land was not very good for farming, so the place wasn't particularly abundant. Maomao's last picture was a leaf, for Jayukai, whom she called the jewel leaf. The year before, there had been a poisoning attempt at a garden party banquet. It was caused by one of the ladies in waiting of the former consort Duo, who acted on her own initiative. The reason for the action was not about taking control. It was a deeply human matter. Maomao understood that much, but it made her wonder who had been behind the first attempt to poison consort Jayukai. There was a good chance the middle consort was responsible. She was the focus of the recent mushroom incident. Where had she learned about that poison, though? They used silver dishware, so it was presumably not arsenic-based. As a result, consort Jayukai reduced her staff of ladies in waiting by half. The woman who had been poisoned instead of the consort was still suffering the aftereffects. It all made Maomao feel a little queasy. She recognized the feeling. It reminded her of Suhari, a palace woman who had been clever enough to pretend to die so she could escape. They still did not know her exact location or what had happened to her. They did not know what her objective had been. They did not know why she had targeted Jinshi. Maomao idly drew circles around her 4 sketches, then she gave up thinking about it entirely. What good will it do me anyway? She was just a lady in waiting. A food taster, a disposable pawn. She decided she needed a change of scenery. There were plenty of gardens in the rear palace, all set up to delight the emperor. These gardens included pine groves, bamboo forests, and fruit orchards. She thought, I guess cherry season is just about over. 3 months ago she could have gotten some bamboo shoots, but because of a certain man with a monocle, she spent that season tending roses in the crystal pavilion. Just thinking of him raised her hackles. Gah, stop, she had to stop this. She felt her steps grow lighter as she thought about a little walk. On her way to the cherry orchard, she met the gaze of some women from the crystal pavilion. She recognized them, so she bowed slightly. They scrunched up their faces and ran away. One of them had very small feet, suggesting they had been bound. However, she moved with a remarkable speed, leaving Maomao impressed despite herself. Drama queens. All I did was tear off their clothes. This happened often at the brothels. A woman with some experience would knock on a door in the pleasure district, and immediately they would strip her down and size her up. People often thought that younger women brought the highest prices. However, the current trend favored knowledge over youth. The wife of an official who had fallen from grace could bring a surprisingly large sum. Because she would likely already have some education, the initial investment would be low. Some men actually preferred a woman who had been someone's wife, a somewhat distasteful preference. Maomao hadn't grabbed the ladies' dresses out of sheer perversity. She had simply assumed all the ladies at the Crystal Pavilion, who loved fashion so much, would have purchased the perfume oil. When she discovered some of them hadn't, she was very surprised. This surprise made her want to be certain. But it had only earned her a scolding from a beautiful eunuch. She supposed she shouldn't be surprised if at least one of them passed on the perfume. There were a lot of women at the Crystal Pavilion. This included 10 ladies in waiting and 30 maids dedicated to the building. Maomao did not give it any further thought and continued on to pick some cherries. That evening the ladies in waiting of the Jade Pavilion were having an early dinner. I am feeling a little tired today, Alan said, half slumped on the table. Maomao put a hand to her forehead and found that she was indeed a touch feverish. Do not go getting a cold. What if Lady Jayukai catches it? Yinghua asked as she took another cherry. She wondered where the cherries had come from, but she happened to like them, so she decided not to investigate too closely. The cherries were a secret from Hongyang, of course. I was being careful, Ailan said, now looking annoyed as well as tired. Maomao was just about to go to her room to mix up a cold remedy when Yinghua stopped her. I apologize for the inconvenience, but if you are going to prepare some medicine, do you think you could take her to the clinic afterward? The clinic? Maomao asked, puzzled. Did she mean the medical office? Taking her there only seemed likely to tire her out even more. Yinghua must have guessed what Maomao was thinking because she shook her head. It is not the medical office. It is There is no doctor there, but someone else cares for people. Ailan knows where it is, so just go with her. Maomao nodded. The clinic, whatever that meant, was located in the northern quarter of the rear palace. Behind some laundry facilities stood a separate building. It was populated by palace women in white outfits. Oh yes, I suppose I was vaguely aware of this place. Maomao had spent a fair amount of time walking through the groves and copses of the northern quarter. However, she had rarely gone to any of its actual buildings. Ailan smiled at her, coughing as she said, I'm sure they mentioned it when you first got here. Do you not remember? Unfortunately, Maomao had been dragged here against her will. She hadn't been paying all that much attention to what she was told. They had given her a lecture on the way over, but she was sure she had been more interested in the mugwort growing by the side of the road. That was just the way she was. The laundry area nearby was bustling with palace women doing washing. They seemed to be working with sheets of some kind. It was logical, Maomao thought. Having a laundry area nearby allowed clothes and bedding to be washed quickly. The location was also good for a medical facility where cleanliness was very important. Pardon me, Ailan said to one of the ladies. I seem to have caught a cold. The woman looked busy and cast a quick, suspicious eye on her. Then she set down her basket of laundry and placed her hand to Ailan's forehead. She said, slight fever, stick out your tongue. Her voice was full of age and experience and her cheeks were deeply wrinkled. She was middle-aged, a rare thing in the rear palace. She squinted at Ailan's tongue, then pulled down her lower eyelids. She looked far more practiced than the quack doctor. She said, it doesn't look too bad. Try not to overwork yourself for 2 or 3 days and you will be fine. How would you like to handle it? The woman's diagnosis was correct. I have to avoid giving this to the consort. Would you let me stay here just to be safe? The woman said again. Then she picked up her basket and walked into the clinic. She set the basket down and motioned them over. Inside, the clinic was stark and unadorned, but not in an elegant way. The pillars were undecorated. The hallways had only wooden floors. The windows were simply square holes. This simplicity had an obvious advantage. The less elaborate the place was, the easier it would be to clean. The many windows let in plenty of air. It looked like it would be a very pleasant place to spend the upcoming season. One thing Maomao did not notice in the clinic was the distinctive smell of medicine. Instead, she got a good whiff of alcohol. Ailan was frowning. She didn't like the smell, and that is why she hadn't wanted to come here. Maomao was impressed, though. To her, the odor meant the place was kept thoroughly clean. Strong alcohol could eliminate toxins in and around wounds. Everyone knew that putting some in your mouth and spitting it out was one method of sterilization. Maomao had always wondered how the rear palace avoided outbreaks of disease with only that quack to care for it. Now this explained it. Okay, let everyone know I'll be back tomorrow, Ailan said. All right, Maomao said. The middle-aged woman gave Ailan a wooden tag with a number on it. She then headed to the room with that number. Maomao looked around the clinic with keen interest. Then she felt someone grab her by the scruff of the neck. It was the same way they grabbed the kitten in the medical office. Time for you to get back to work, the woman said. Don't think you can slack off just because you had to bring your friend here. Maomao did not respond. What's that? The middle-aged woman said, grinning. You say you will stay and wash all the laundry here. Maomao shook her head vigorously. In the end, she was left with no choice but to go back to the Jade Pavilion. She could not win with these older women. The madam had taught her that. Maomao trotted back to the Jade Pavilion. She had really wanted to see more of the clinic, but it was not going to happen now. As she walked, women carrying laundry baskets hurried past. It rained frequently this time of year. Therefore, the ladies had their hands full doing as much washing as possible whenever there was a break in the clouds. Now that she thought about it, Maomao realized she needed to get the laundry later. She couldn't help noticing something else. The woman who had kicked her out of the clinic wasn't the only older woman there. All the women she saw were comparatively advanced in age. The rear palace operated in a way that women were often replaced as they aged. Generally, you could expect to leave before you turned 30 years old. Anyone still there after that age likely held a higher position, such as matron of the serving women, or served as a lady-in-waiting to one of the consorts. Hongyang, for example, should have been sent away from the palace a long time ago. Saying so aloud though would likely result in a slap. Judging by how skilled the ladies of the clinic seemed at their work, Maomao guessed they were allowed to stay because they served an important function in the rear palace. She wondered about the fact that the place hadn't smelled of medicine at all. Had the smell of alcohol simply overpowered it? Or Maomao walked along, stroking her chin in thought when she ran smack into something with a thump. She thought maybe she'd bumped into a pillar until she realized a countenance like a heavenly nymph was shining above her like the sun. You shouldn't walk along muttering to yourself. You'll trip, I was muttering. Jinchi heaved a sigh, spreading his hands and shaking his head. The clear show of exasperation rankled Maomao, and she was about to give him a look as if he was an earthworm floating in a puddle. Then she saw Gaoshan, his face calm as a bodhisattva. She managed to force her narrowed eyes open. Do you need anything, sir? She asked. No, nothing. We just happened to run into each other and I talked to you. Was that wrong? Jinchi looked a tad startled. Gaoshan appeared to be silently trying to tell her something, but she was very sorry to say she didn't know what it was. Where were you coming from? Jinchi asked, his shoulders slumped a bit. The clinic. So that's where it was. I told the palace women to show it to you when you arrived. Surely they didn't forget. Certainly not. Maomao, noticing the unusually serious expression on Jinchi's face, wondered what she should do. Was the eunuch having a crisis of confidence about his work? He always seemed so sure of himself. Jinchi guided them to a quiet side street. Considering how simply standing there, the gorgeous eunuch could draw a crowd large enough to get in the way of work, it was probably a wise choice. Maomao said, I was impressed with how well the place was run. Frankly, I think we could afford to make that the medical office. But then again, if they did that, the doctor would lose his head, and Maomao would lose a convenient place to slack off. She was about to correct herself when she realized Jinchi's eyebrows were furrowed again. Make it the medical office. Yes, life would be much easier if we could do that. What do you mean, sir? Only men are allowed to be doctors as such, Gaoshan explained. And only doctors can prepare medicine or administer care for anything more serious than a scrape. So that is it, Maomao thought. She now understood why the clinic hadn't smelled like medicine. This suggested a specific problem. Where does that leave me? She asked. She could make as much medicine as she wanted. She couldn't bring ingredients in from outside the rear palace naturally. However, she was able to use the wide range of herbs growing on the palace grounds and the supplies available at the medical office. We are looking the other way. There were several ladies in waiting who knew something about medicine. However, in a place like that, drugs would be too obvious. We cannot keep them there. Jinchi's tone suggested a complicated story. Perhaps it involved the details of various rules and regulations, such as how the palace women's salaries worked. Maomao did not know. It was not something she had any interest in. Therefore, proper medicine was denied to the clinic, but they managed to use alcohol as a disinfectant. Simply having a clean and quiet place could be enough to help fight many illnesses. If a woman appeared to be in particularly bad shape, it might also be possible to send her back home. What a lot of trouble, Maomao thought. The only thing that would be harder still was replacing a system that was already established. Many people seemed very interested in avoiding trouble. I wish we had more options for the medical staff. We might need them someday, Jinchi said. He couldn't criticize Maomao as he wasn't perfect himself. He sounded as if he was speaking to her, but he was essentially talking to himself. We will need a way when there are no more eunuchs. Eunuchs, huh? The eunuchs made up almost a third of the population of the rear palace. They were much harder to replace than the ladies, so their average age was relatively old. No young eunuchs, Maomao reflected. The surgery to make a man into a eunuch had been outlawed several years before, after the current emperor took the throne. Maomao did not know when Jinshi had become a eunuch, but judging by his age, it must have been shortly before the procedure was outlawed. That was tough luck. If only he could have waited a little longer. She dropped her gaze without really meaning to. She glanced between Jinshi's legs, then brought her hands together gently. She looked up slowly and found herself meeting Jinshi's eyes. His face showed a range of conflicting emotions. He looked at Maomao with his mouth half open. Crap. Did I say that out loud? Maomao put a hand to her mouth and looked away. This time she found herself looking at Gaoshun. He continued to appear beatific, but she thought he was looking at Jinshi with the same pitying smile as hers. Slowly, Gaoshun shook his head. Master Jinshi, business calls, he prodded. All right. He looked at Maomao. If you would, let them know I will be coming by the Jade Pavilion later. Then he was walking away, looking as elegant as ever. Maomao finally took her hand away from her mouth. I could probably make a nice profit if I could come up with a medicine that would make it grow back. It was, shall we say, a most improper thought. But if she could have managed it, she would have done a roaring business indeed. Chapter 10, Third Time's the Charm, Part 1. The next day Ailan returned from the clinic. However, Maomao found herself summoned there as well, much to her chagrin. It was by the middle-aged palace woman who had questioned her the day before. So that is why they want to see Maomao, Jayukayu said to Ailan, her hand on her chin. They were in the living area. Jayukayu lay stretched out on a couch. Her belly was well and truly round now, large enough to slow her down. She wore clothes designed to hide the bulge, but even so it would probably be best for her to avoid attending tea outside the Jade Pavilion for a while. I'm so sorry, Ailan said. I should have taken it here instead. Ailan had taken the cold medicine Maomao made her while she was still at the clinic. One of the ladies there spotted her and asked where she had gotten it. That would do it, Maomao thought. Medicine was not allowed at the clinic because there were no doctors there. People could not just walk in with it. They had to find out the story behind Ailan's medicine, lest official eyes take notice of them. Maomao was thinking it would be best for her to head right to the clinic, take her scolding and get it over with. Then Ailan said something most unexpected. They want to know if they can borrow her for a while. Goodness, said Jayukayu, looking at Maomao with curiosity. Ailan watched them both with concern. Maomao thought this seemed likely to be a headache. She contemplated the ingredients for a new medicine. Ultimately, Maomao found herself returning to the clinic under guard. It was Ailan escorting her, but Yinghua. She probably seemed right for the job. She was shorter than Ailan, but she was more outgoing and more determined to face things head-on. Even though the clinic was within the rear palace, it was quite a walk to get there. Yinghua, who always talked a lot, could not stop chatting on the way. Hey, Maomao. After you dropped Ailan off yesterday, did you do something with the lanterns in the garden? You saw that. It had been on her way back from the clinic, or more precisely, after she had bumped into Jinshi and Gaoshun on the way home. Struck by an idea for a new medicine, she set out immediately to find the components. I was just looking for the ingredients for some medicine. She lit a lantern when it got dark, attracting bugs. This also attracted a certain creature that ate bugs. Ingredients. Tell me it wasn't bugs, it wasn't bugs. Despite Maomao's assurances, Yinghua continued to frown. She seemed to sense something even less pleasant was happening. Maomao, about your room. It's gotten pretty full of stuff lately, wouldn't you say? It's really starting to stink of medicine. Lady Hongyang isn't very happy. Now that's scary. You don't look very scared. Nothing could be further from the truth, Maomao thought. The chief lady-in-waiting had a very quick hand. But then, perhaps one had to be strong like that to survive in the rear palace. I think one of these days she's going to kick you out of your room and make you live in a shed in the garden, Yinghua said with a smirk. I'd like that very much. A garden shed would be larger than the room she was in now, and more importantly, well separated from the other ladies' sleeping quarters, so nobody would notice any clattering in the night. It frustrated Maomao that she couldn't use the many unused tools she had discovered in the medical office. She said, her eyes shining, I will be sure to ask Lady Hongyang about this when I return. Wait, they arrived at the clinic before Yinghua could finish what she was saying. Let's head inside, Maomao said. Hey, about that thing I said I didn't mean to. Maomao didn't really hear Yinhua. She was too busy wondering if with a building of her own she might be able to do work that involved fire. Her heart swelled with anticipation. The middle-aged woman turned out to be named Shenel. On close inspection her eyes had a green hue just like consort Gyuko's. Perhaps she had some Western blood in her veins. The colour of her eyes might also have inspired her name, which meant deep green. Maomao and Yinhua were shown into what seemed to be the clinic's reception area. It smelled faintly of alcohol.